Well, good morning and welcome back to another episode of The Nerd Out. I am Lyle.
I am Jack. Welcome back.
Welcome back, yeah. And it's Thanksgiving week, so
It is. It's a great week to look forward to.
time to be grateful. I know
time to
you
be
all are
grateful.
grateful for the life of Sugar.
Yes, our wonderful 15-year-old dog. I think we are facing the inevitable this afternoon of having to make that decision to help her not deal with pain and things. So, but it's been a good run. She's had a good run.
Yeah.
She has stolen many a cakes and many plates of brownies. We don't know how she jumped and got it off the counter, but
Especially with how large it's a little dog. And if you've never seen Sugar, Sugar's a little chunk.
she is skinnier now.
Is she now?
I
Yes,
think that's
well, that
part of
makes
the
sense.
issues in
And
this,
she has
but
lived up to her name, clearly.
she has ingested a lot of her namesake
There you go.
over the years.
So if you're thinking of the Scholl family today, throw up a word of prayer just for them. Just especially, I know your daughters are
For my
gonna-
daughters,
it's
in
losing
particular.
a family member. So.
Yep. But it's all good.
Yeah.
But we're going into a week of celebration, coming off a week of mourning
right.
from all the U of A losses. But
Right.
it's okay. The sun will come up. It did come up today.
It did.
Life will go on.
But yes.
What's your favorite Thanksgiving item?
Or
items?
There's a family recipe from my great grandmother, which means it's not healthy. Like the amount of butter that goes in this thing disgusts some people, and we've cut it. But she called it sweet potato pudding because it's not really like a pie; it's more like a casserole. But it's fantastic. So
Okay. I am a traditionalist in the sense that I will love turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, smothered in gravy.
do you go stuffing with or without celery? How do you feel about that?
I'm fine with celery. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm not.
No? Okay.
Yeah, my
You're
sister-in-law,
anti-celery.
God bless her, she learned that, and so she started to make stuffing just for me.
That's
and then
so
the other
kind.
stuff, yes. So that,
That's so
before that, I almost never had stuffing because just that flavor. I was
No.
Yeah.
So what is your favorite Thanksgiving item or food item that you're looking forward to scarfing down?
Yeah.
Maybe here in a couple days. Put it in the chat. Occasionally people put stuff in the chat. Never very
It's
often.
usually like one person. They're like,
Yeah.
"Hey guys."
I think our last one was Aaron. Shout out.
right.
Thanks, Aaron, for the shout out. But anyway,
So the generous life.
yes.
The generous life was last night. It's kind of a one-off before we jump into our Christmas series next week.
Starts this week.
But important to stop and talk about it. In fact, you even brought up how Jesus spoke about how we manage resources and wealth. Like that was 25% of what he said.
Yeah, scholars have kind of looked at that percentage-wise of either money, resource, how we manage, how we take care of our resources.
Right.
25% of the time. So we don't preach.
Which
one
how often
every
does he speak
4.
about the kingdom? It's like just a little bit more. It's
yeah,
pretty-
just a little bit more than that. There's 2,300 verses in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, that deal with money or resource. And so the Bible has a lot to say. Scripture has a lot to say about our resource. And I think, the overall premise that we've said for years is that we are managers, not owners. And so as we learn to manage, there's a lot of wisdom that the Scripture gives to managing it well, and therefore to have the kind of life that we really want.
Right. And it's a fascinating question for you kind of talked last night and made light of the fact that people show up to church and like, oh, of course they're talking about money. But I think that's an honest question for people to wrestle with is what's the balance then? Like we see that Jesus speaks this much about managing wealth, speaks this often about money and resources. So what's the balance between a church being transparent and like not talking about those things? Like how does that work then? I think that's a tension that we have to live in.
Yeah, it's a fair question to wrestle with in that. But anyway, and the truth is you deal with money every single day, every single moment, every single decision in some way, shape, or form is around a crux of how you leverage resources, need to get resources, manage the resources you have. And so it's an all-encompassing reality. And I think that's why Jesus spoke about it so much, because he knew and knows, active, not just knew in the past, but knows that it's something that will be a rival God. And that's kind of what we looked at in Matthew chapter 6 a little bit.
And maybe to help us answer that question, or for people who wrestle with that tension, what's the balance of how often Jesus is speaking about resources and wealth in terms of having people give that to the church versus speaking about that from the perspective of don't let these things own you?
Yeah, as far as maybe rephrase that, let me make sure I heard that right.
Yeah, so what's the balance with how often Jesus is, when he talks about our resources and what we have been given, how often is he talking about giving that directly to the church versus how often he's talking about our need to control this because we don't need this to control us?
Correct. Probably 90% the second way, in the sense that it's very rarely the idea of, giving to the church was obviously a rhythm in a Jewish culture context because of the way the Levites were established as a tribe, the way that the other 11 tribes cared for them. And so it was very much ingrained in a reality in that. And so for Jesus' listeners, they would have already known that and seen that. But when you look through his teachings, it's not like Jesus is calling. It's not like he was trying to raise money for the synagogue then or a campaign for things then, nor is he trying to say, oh, you've got to do all this for the church. And so scholars will debate, and especially New Testament scholars will debate whether, okay, is the tithe and 10% still a factor, a reality of what we're to live under, a filter, if you will? Yeah. And people will fall on either side of that camp. And we didn't talk anything about percentages last night. What we're talking about is this tension of reality that you cannot serve both God and money, and that they will be in constant tension. And how do you fight back against the pull of what I loved about, and John Mark Comer's where I got the illustration from, the idea that Mammon was the Syrian god of wealth. Right. And so you cannot serve both God and Mammon, or God and money. Right. You may hear in different translations or have heard it in the past, that it's not just, money is neutral. It's not an evil thing or a good thing. But at the same time, it's not just neutral. It is a power source. And so the same way that we put concrete and protection around nuclear power, we don't let it out and about in the world because we know its effects. Right. Jesus is saying, hey, this money thing is a power, and it will continue to come after. And the enemy certainly uses that in our Western society, the pull, the craving for money, for power, for resource, for more, is a little g God that will continue to want our allegiance. And in order to fight against the detriment of where that could take us, and the fear and greed that will breed within our lives if we don't have it in check. And the only way to really keep it in check, Jesus is saying, is the practice of generosity.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction for folks to draw, is just even in the way that we've talked about money as a church. I get that historically there's examples of people, of churches who've talked about money pretty poorly. And they've talked about it in a way where it feels like a pastor's trying to get rich. But
or
the reality is, when's the last time you guys saw us posting from first class on Instagram, or, sipping champagne on the yacht? We're not doing this because we're trying to get rich. Right. We don't talk about this because we're trying to get rich. Jesus isn't trying to get rich. Jesus is saying, don't let anything master you. Like that's really what it boils down to. And that's what last night, I appreciate that's what it was about. So before we get too far, let's go over our takeaways.
You got some?
And so kind of the key takeaways from last night, just to catch you up if you didn't get a chance to hear it. Number one, Jesus taught frequently about money and resources, which we've already talked about. It was about 25% of his teachings. 2, generosity is linked to increased happiness, better health, and stronger relationships. Number 3, our hearts follow our treasure. Where we invest, our hearts will be drawn. 4th, we can't serve both God and money. And so generosity helps resist money's gravitational pull. And then lastly, it's this: God is a generous provider, and we're called to reflect his generosity.
Yep. I think we're called to not only reflect that, but in the front end of that is to revel in the reality of God's goodness and his provision for us. That really is what Jesus is getting at in Matthew 6, is he's trying to help his earliest followers and current followers go, you've got to see God the right way. He's good. He's a provider for you. Doesn't mean you're going to win the lottery. Doesn't mean you're going to get everything your heart ever desires and wishes. Doesn't mean you won't face hardship and difficulty and challenge. But he is good. He's good to the world, good people and bad people. He's good to you when we're good, when we're bad. That's why our merit doesn't determine our relationship with Christ. It's his grace and his grace alone. And God is gracious and generous to us all the time.
Right. I love that distinction that you said, that this isn't like a character trait of God's. This is who God is.
Right.
Like that is his nature.
Yeah. It's not an action step that he does every so often. I'm going to check it off.
Right.
No, it is who he is.
Yeah. So leaning into this idea of generosity, how it promotes kind of some good health benefits, or that there's joy that comes from that. So where have you seen that maybe in your own life, or practicing generosity, or do you have any of the data kind of behind wanting to go into that, of how that does lead to greater happiness and especially spiritual growth?
Yeah. The paradox of generosity, I forget, Smith and I forget, I mentioned it last night, but that book is where we get a lot of the research from that. Obviously, there's a ton of other research outside of that, but and they come at it from a scientific standpoint, empirical data standpoint, but also from a Christian perspective. And so if you're interested in that, that's where I would point you to and recommend the Paradox of Generosity book. And they're doing the studies and coming out with, and them and other social science over the years. I mean, we've read back and forth that, gosh, if you want to be happier, if you want to have more joy in life, then let generosity and the practice of that play out in your life. And I know for me, when I'm stingy, reluctant, not quick to pick up the coffee for someone else, or not quick to respond to the opportunities God puts across my path, it's like I can feel my own heart go, okay, a little bit, it just closes just a little bit. Door's not totally closed yet, but it gets a little tighter. It's like when you're a kid and your parents' door is like, and you're like, no. And so it's just like it closes a little bit more. But yet when you live with a generous heart, it's amazing to me. I've seen it through, 40 years now of following the Lord, 40 plus, of just when I give, it's amazing to me how God just, in other strange ways, he just gives back. And you're like, where did that come from? And how did that happen? And it's just when I live with that open-handedness of, I'm a manager, it's not mine, it's mine to manage, but it's not mine to hold on to. And I don't have to live with a scarcity mindset. I can live with that abundance mindset. God's good, that enough is enough, and he will provide enough. He says that. Yeah. I know what you need. The pagans run after all these things. I know that you need it. I'm going to give it to you. Yeah. And again, it doesn't mean, so my kids always had what they needed. They didn't get to go on all the trips that some of maybe their other friends get to go on. And that's okay. That's a capacity or a bandwidth thing. But they had more than enough, and they never lacked. And the truth is, I've never lacked. God's been good and faithful as I've tried to mirror more and more that generosity. So it's become fun to do that. I know Amy and I've done that occasionally in certain times with especially some single moms that we hear stories about, and we're able to do something anonymously. I prefer to do it anonymously because I don't want people to know. Jesus talks about not letting your left hand know what your right hand's doing. And there's just a joy. Like, it's just so much fun to see the blessing that it is to someone else. And you're like, man, I got to be a part of that. And I get teary even now just thinking about small things that, and it's not huge things, but it's a pacing. And we've gotten better at that. And by better, I mean more. Like, we're trying to leverage more. That's one of our principles that we try to live with. And we're not, we don't have the scope that other people have. Other people have a bigger scope. Whatever scope you got, I think that's the point Jesus is saying is leverage the scope you got.
You don't need to look at what others...
It's not about stats. It's about action. And can you... And that's one of the questions we ask at the start of every year is, okay, where can we increase our generosity? And how do we do that? So we always start with the church, but we give beyond the church and in other capacities, and so we're always looking to try to expand that.
Yeah. And there's a dark side to that where we can go down the generosity rabbit hole where we work to improve our situation and have margin to give. And I've seen it not just in my own life, I've seen it in others' lives too, where sometimes it can be difficult to receive the generosity from someone else.
Totally.
Because we're trying to give. How do we balance that tension of maybe we've been in a season of being generous and then someone wants to be generous and do something for us, and like we sometimes can kind of balk at the idea and just be like, whoa, no, like, how do we balance that to make sure that we're not robbing someone else of their own growth and generosity?
Yeah, I think that is, remember when you were in grade school, I don't know if your school had the teeter-totters, and the teeter-totter was, okay, one person was, heavier or jumps up and then back and forth. And the reality is to be a generous person, I've got to not just be one-sided. I've got to enjoy the play of that. And so I don't want to rob other people. And so I know there's a tendency in our own heart when we feel like we're established or we feel like, okay, we've got the margin, we're working on being generous. Sometimes we almost feel like, well, I don't want to be your charity case, or I don't need it. And so let's give it to someone else. And the truth is, people want to bless people, not just because of need, but because of a desire and a want to affirm a relationship or to invest in a relationship. And so it's okay to get better at receiving. It's more blessed to give than receive, but Jesus doesn't say, don't ever receive. So it is both and. It's this teeter-totter of I want to get better at receiving. Listen, it's fun to receive, isn't it? If we're honest. And I know you and I have benefited from receiving from people, and we're blessed by that. And I'm honored by that. And I want to acknowledge that that's part of what grows my own gratitude, that God sees, and He is behind the scenes, sees what we're doing and the heart that we're trying to develop. And He's going, I got you. And I'm going to bless you as you seek to bless others. That's all the way back to the blessing Abraham. I'm going to bless you so you can be a blessing. In fact, we say that to our kids all the time. I said it again this morning, driving here. Callie's leaving for college class, and it's like we have this dumb little saying. It's not dumb, but I'm sure they roll their eyes almost every time. Like, be blessed and be a blessing. And I know that seems corny to say, but that's really what we want them to feel is, hey, live in the blessing of God, receive, but also be a blessing to others and be generous with your life. Not just your money, but your time, your energy, your resource, your attention, especially your attention in this economy. Your attention matters in the attention economy. And so sometimes it's just taking thought of people and caring for them. So generosity goes beyond money, but it's not less than money. Money has to be, our resource has to be involved in that somehow.
And I think it's important to close that thought. It's not just about the blessings other people are seeking to grow, like when they're growing their own generosity. God still wants to provide for you. And just because God has provided more than enough financially doesn't mean that sometimes He wants to provide a coffee or a meal that someone else wants to buy for a person. Like, it's interesting that sometimes we get to a place where we find so much success in our own life that we reject the blessing that God still wants to give us in that area because we feel like we don't need it. And it's like, nope, we don't get to reject how God wants to bless us. Like sometimes God will be doing a work in someone else's heart. And as they say yes to that, that involves you needing to receive. And there's a healthy tension in that of being willing to just receive of what it is that God wants to do, whether it's because of you or someone else.
Right. And I think, I had a mentor, Roger, I talk about him all the time. When people want to give you something, or whether it's a compliment or maybe it's a resource in some way, shape, or form, I know from time to time we've had different people in our life who have, maybe they own a cabin in the White Mountains and they let us go up there and get away for a weekend. And it's,
Someone lets you drive a Corvette to church.
well, yes, one let me drive a Corvette to church. First time ever. That was super fun. And
Yesterday.
it was super fun. I did not tell him the joke that I told you, and I'm not sure if I should say it now, but I think I'll tell him individually. But
now everyone's going to want to know.
I know. Stay tuned. So anyway, but to receive those is a blessing, and to just enjoy. And so the mentor, Roger, would just say thanks. Like, you don't have to come up with a speech when you're receiving. If you feel hesitant in your spirit of like, oh, I don't know if I really deserve this, or I don't need it, let's find someone else, or blah, 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 just shut up and just say thanks. And just let God be at work in your own heart. That is part of humility also. Humility to receive, as well as humility to try to live that not everything is about me, and I can try to be a blessing to others. Humility is dual-sided. In that.
And there's another aspect of this that I think is worth talking about, which data kind of shows that this is particularly true of millennials and younger. But I want to say I first heard about it after there was like earthquakes, or there's something that was going on, and the Red Cross was doing like a texting thing, and people were giving towards this. Again, there was a natural disaster, right? But they've come up with this term, slacktivism, where there are people who they feel like they're helping and that they're being activists, but really what they're doing, they're contributing money to something, and they just get content to kind of contribute money and kind of throw money at these things. And so you're making a little bit of a difference, because yes, you're giving you $5 or $10, which goes a long way, but they call it slacktivism because there's not really a passion or a heart to serve. There's not a heart to get involved. It's just kind of, well, my heartstrings have been tugged a little bit. Let me throw money at it, and now I feel like I've done my duty. So how do we battle slacktivism in this day and age, where there's a way that you could hear last night's message and be convicted and be like, I do need to be more generous. So I'll give up one coffee a month and give that to the church, and now we're patting ourselves on the back. So how do we not become the slacktivists, but make sure that we're involved, that our heart really is involved with what we're giving to?
Well, and I think that's where Jesus' statement of where your treasure is, your heart will be there also. That's why I think so much of the New Testament teaching on money, or Jesus' teaching on money, is a calculated, intentional truth of a structure to that, not just giving out of guilt feelings or giving out of, oh, I want to feel compassionate, so I do this. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's no intentionality to that. There's an emotionality to that. And when you look through the teaching in the New Testament and Jesus is teaching on money, it's not an emotional teaching. It's an intentional teaching of saying, hey, you got to push back against this greed and fear and pursuit of more and all that. So you have to be intentional. And so be generous, but be generous intentionally. And what I mean by that is I think it's going to take some purpose. The same way that, especially if you're Gen Z, millennial, like you're purposeful about your life. You've got a purpose and a significance you're pursuing. Well, then the way you manage resources should be just as intentional in that. Now, you can go way far to the end that you're managing every dime and every dollar and become weird. We use that word occasionally. Don't become weird with that. But at the same time, don't just live by emotion and be guided by that of like, oh, okay, my heartstrings are pulled, I'm going to do this. There may be a time for that. But are you being intentional with building the practice of generosity in your life? And with that being, okay, here's the things that God says he cares about. He knows he cares about his church, his local church. And so we give to the local church that we're a part of because it takes, like we said, real money to do real ministry. And so we really want to be involved in that. We give to a couple other organizations that we believe in. We believe in their mission of what they're doing, the impact that they're having. And so we're intentional about that. So each month we have it earmarked out of where things are going. And then hopefully we are living with enough margin that maybe other emotional things that come up or opportunities that come across our path, we can respond to in some way, shape, or form in that way too. But that's the small slice of the pie part. The big part of the pie is actually being intentional, and it's already spelled out.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered. I don't know. How would you answer that?
Yeah, it's just, I think the intentionality matters. I think we just don't want to ever get to the point where we're impressed with ourselves.
Yeah.
And how we're progressing in our own discipleship. And so I think being willing in two areas, it's time and money. I've said this before, that I think it's healthy to give a little bit more than you're comfortable giving from time to time. To give just enough where it hurts you just a little bit, where you're kind of wincing, and just a personal thing, that as my brother and I are closing out my mom's estate, I'm getting ready to write the largest tithe check I've ever written. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I know it's coming in the next couple of months,
Right.
as this closes out, and that's going to be painful. But that's good. It's healthy to be stretched in that way.
Yep.
And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, okay, we'll take something that you value, that you love, that maybe you still use, not quite as much as you should. Maybe you need to not use that thing as much, and so sell that thing and then give that money.
Right.
Or give in a way that you can't control the giving, like give in a way where it's, some people like to give to a specific cause. What if you didn't give that specifically and earmark that, in a certain way, but you did just give it to the church, and say, okay, we need to trust the church to do what the leadership knows is where this can best be used.
Yeah.
So I think those things are good, but also to give of your time in ways that can hurt, where you have to interrupt your own schedule or what's comfortable for you. And so that's how we avoid the slacktivism side of things, is we don't want to just throw money at things and feel content. I think that there's an aspect of, yes, we want to be generous by giving money to a cause, but make sure that your heart is in what you're doing.
Yeah, maybe it's an intentionality, but it's also an involvement, and it's both and of those. How can I be involved in that, as well as, and I think that's why the local church matters. Jesus is the one who said, I'm going to build my church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. And the local church matters, and maybe matters more in communities than we can maybe get our mind around. And, we talk about all the time that the harvest is plentiful, 1 million plus people that in Southern Arizona that aren't connected in a faith community. And so it's not like we have less to do. We have more to do, and we don't need less churches. We need more, and we need more healthy churches who are leveraging their resources and their influence and their impact that they can have to reach people, because God loves people. He cares about people, and he's pursuing them. That's so we talked about vision. We talked about even our future, did a little family chat. So again, if you call Elements home, I really want to encourage you to listen to the message, but listen to the family chat at the end, because we try to do that from time to time, and we don't post necessarily that stuff or stats or things online, but we're here and available to chat about it. We're available, Absolutely. So if you ever have questions, we try to be pretty transparent and not hide anything. There's nothing to hide. And so, come talk to us.
Yeah. And it was interesting, even in that family chat, I feel like you kind of undersold some of what you talked about, because thinking of when we launched, there was another church that launched at a similar time. And you talked about budget of like, hey, if we're going to get to this place where we ever have our own building, we're going to have to double our yearly budget right now. And I know that, I want to say it was 6 or 7 years ago, I happened to be helping out at this church that launched around the same time we did. And while our yearly budget at that point was like $225,000, their yearly budget was $1.1 million.
Oops.
That's not even, like, that's pre-COVID, pre-inflation, right. Where, So to me, like, I'm proud of how, as a team, we've worked really hard to manage resources, and to be wise with what we do.
Be good stewards.
Because we want to be generous with how we as a church give back in our community, but we also want to be good stewards of what we have to use it to do ministry here.
Yep.
And so we love being able to be transparent about it, because it does matter. And we want people to know that we don't have anything to hide when it comes to that.
Yeah. And the truth kind of, as we unpack that, we've crested over that 300,000 annual budget the last couple of years, but the truth is for us to, if we ever feel like, and I do feel like the day's coming that we will have our own space or place to call kind of our hub of ministry. It's going to take double that. It's going to take 600,000 more or more in an annual budget, let alone the facility cost. And so just to get the right kind of staffing, to get the right structures, to get the right margin and the right, they talk about in business world, PP&E, the ability to begin updating the property, keep it up to date, and not let it atrophy in that. And so it just takes investment. And if you're a homeowner, you know that. If you're an apartment owner, you know that because you got to call the super to come and fix things. And so the truth is, I mentioned kind of joking last night, if someone offered us a church property for $1, I would gladly pay the $1. But the truth is it wouldn't be wise for us to pay it because we couldn't take on the overhead that comes with that. We have one church friend here in the city that 13 air conditioners went out in their place. Could you imagine the price tag to replace 13 air conditioners? That is a reality.
Especially because we're talking commercial units.
Right.
Like,
You're not talking residential. And so you got that. You got, we're just looking, here's another transparency. We're looking at updating screens. I just got a bid for updating our LED screens. To do 2 different screens left and right of the baptistry. We got to work with Emmanuel on that. $35,000. Hello. So that's just one bid. We're waiting for others to come in, but it takes real money to do real ministry. That's the truth of it. And we all know that, but we don't like to admit that sometimes. And so that's the reality that we're navigating, and we're trying to be good stewards of that. And I really feel I'm proud of our board. I'm proud of us as a staff. I'm proud of our elders managing that. We've done really well. And I love where we're at, but I love where we're going.
Right.
And it's going to take some more resource to go where we want to go.
Yeah. And hear us on all this too. We're not saying it takes more from every one of you. It may take a little bit more from some of you. Absolutely. And we want to invite you into that process, not because we're trying to manipulate, but because there's blessing that comes from serving and being involved in building the kingdom. Right. When you take ownership of that and start to see the payoff from that, it is so rewarding. But what we're saying is for us to get there, it's going to take people who aren't even here at our church right now. That may be someone who doesn't even have faith in Christ right now, that you could play a role in helping lead them to Christ just through sharing your faith. It could be people who are going to move to Tucson, whether that be through the military, through a job, whatever it is. And so just join us in praying on how you can be a part of that, but also join us in praying that God would bring the right people to equip our church to be everything that he wants us to be.
And I don't know if we've never talked about it publicly, but I guess we could do it here. We have people who have been giving or have given to this church who have never set foot in a service, ever, who just believe in the kingdom work that we're doing, believe in where we're doing it, in the heart of the city, because maybe they don't live in the heart of the city, but they realize that there's a different dynamic and different need in the core and the heart of the city than maybe where they live. And we know who they are in the sense that they've given from out time. But I remember getting handed a $30,000 check from someone who, again, has never set foot in a service. They may have watched a service online, maybe, I don't even know that, who just believed in what we're doing. And we have other people who have been giving on a more regular basis from time to time. And so it is praying that God continue to bring our people involvement and intentionality, other people into involvement and intentionality to see God do what only he can do. And we get to watch that unfold. And I'm excited about that.
Was there anything that you kind of cut out from your sermon? Anything that didn't quite make the cut?
Man, I was racing toward the end because I know I went longer. I didn't ask you how long I went, but I bet I went 5 or 6 minutes over what I normally.
Do you want to guess?
45?
46.
46, okay.
You're literally right when you said 5 or 6 minutes.
Yep, I felt like
For those of you
I felt
if you
it. But
didn't hear me, I think I said this recently, like Mr. Consistency here usually goes 40 minutes and some odd seconds. So yeah, I think it was like 46:21 when I cut the
I
sermon
felt it.
down. Yeah,
But
the video.
I was racing through a couple things, but I feel like I got to hit everything. The family chat, again, maybe I would have gone a little more into just some of the stats. I did cut some of those of just God and Money as a book that some of the authors have studied, evangelical giving over the last 100 years. And we mentioned the idea that for the majority of those 100 years, it's been pretty flat, about 3%. Of evangelical Christians giving about 3% to their church and charities. That's not just church. That's like overall. Now, I know for a lot of folks,
about 3% of evangelical Christians are giving, and of that 3% who give, they're giving about 3%.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Of the evangelicals that give, they give about 3%.
So on average, gotcha.
So average is like 2.5 to 3%. Of evangelical Christians that give that amount. I know for some of you, you give more than that. Again, it's not about a percentage here. This is about if our rate of living increases and income increases, maybe growing in generosity does your giving increase along with that? And maybe that really is the question to wrestle with, not what percentage are you giving, but are you growing in your generosity in that? And the one stat was that 40%, I think it's 38%, specifically of evangelical Christians that attend a church never give a dime to that church. Yeah. Now, again, the church is not here to get money. The church is here to give you things and be for you. But at the same time, part of being for you is realizing that generosity helps you grow as a follower of Jesus. And jokingly, we say it as pastors, the wallet is usually the last thing to get saved. But part of being a follower of Jesus is bringing every area of life under the lordship and leadership of Jesus, that he's got to have say and sway into all areas, including my finances, including my wealth and my management of that.
Absolutely. So even as we wrap up, I think there's some good application that for those of you who, if you go through this with your E-group or even just you want to kind of take this deeper on yourself as you're thinking about it.
Oh, the questions, yeah.
I would just, instead of questions, just some simple things here. It's the week of Thanksgiving. You kind of challenged us to think of what we are thankful for and show gratitude. So practice some intentional gratitude this week. Make a daily list of things that you are thankful for and let that kind of sway your heart into seeing how God doesn't have a scarcity mindset in providing for you, that he wants to abundantly provide for you. Another great thing to do, evaluate your current giving. And so if you're not currently giving, pray about what's an amount that you can cheerfully give. That's what Scripture calls us to do. Yep. How do we give joyfully? And so if you can joyfully be like, yeah, I do want to grow in this area, I can give X amount. Start there. And for those of you who use percentage, if you feel like you're in a great spot, good. Don't worry about it. If you're like, man, maybe I do need to be stretched a little bit more, just ask God to put a number on your heart in that way. Maybe it's just, 1%, whatever it might be, just finding those marginal ways that we can give more. I think because it's Thanksgiving week, another good one here is try to find a way that you can unexpectedly be generous. Whether you're buying coffee for a stranger, if there's a neighbor who has a project that you can jump in and do some manual labor with them, whether it's donating to a local charity, if there's some things around the house that you need to get rid of to create some space that you're not using anymore, find a place that you can give that. And I think this is probably one of the more healthy ones. How can we reflect on areas where fear or greed, you talked about kind of these two things that keep us from giving. Reflect on those areas where fear or greed might be influencing your financial decisions. And then just ask God to guide you in trusting him in those areas and what that might look like to do something to combat the fear or the greed. So anything that you'd have to add to that?
Yeah, I think maybe the last question I ask in the sermon is if you could live in absolute assurance that God will provide enough, how would that sensation, that realization, change your mindset toward money and generosity?
There you go. Well, as they say, stick a fork in it.
I hope to on Thursday. Come on.
Amen. That's why I went that direction with that
So proud
metaphor.
of you.
So we hope you have a great Thanksgiving. And just it's a good time to acknowledge for some people, this will be your first
It'll be
Thanksgiving
challenging.
without someone who used to be there or a family member. And so you're going to feel the weight of an empty seat. And so for those of you who will be experiencing that, our heart is with you. We'll be praying for you as well as you navigate that. That's something that we've navigated.
You're experiencing that?
Recently
I'm experiencing
ourselves.
That. Yeah.
But for those of you who just get to enjoy that wonderful time with family, I hope that that's a blessing for you. And just it's a great week to get to kind of stop and take stock of what God's been doing in your life. So, yeah.
Yeah. Final take, totally off subject. What'd you think of Bonhoeffer?
It was really
Did you
good.
see it?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Bonhoeffer,
Bonhoeffer.
if we were going to get full German on.
Yeah.
It was, Bonhoeffer.
That's my German
I
roots,
thought it was really good. Well
I
done.
really enjoyed it. I thought it was just really challenging. And just to see him live out with that kind of courage was inspiring.
It's been fun talking to a couple people who didn't even realize much about his life, who are interested in seeing the movie just because they've heard me kind of talk about just how incredible of an example he is for us as believers, and just very inspiring.
I'd forgotten that when his life was taken, it literally was 2 or 3 weeks right before the end of...
You're literally spoiling. So many people didn't even know
is that
his
a spoiler?
life. Yeah.
Sorry, withdrawn.
I intentionally didn't tell some folks
Withdrawn.
what happens, but no, I mean it's already out there.
In a courtroom, isn't that you just get to say withdrawn, and people have to forget it. Withdrawn.
But yeah, it is. It's.
I'd forgotten that. Anyway,
Yeah, it's an interesting detail.
what did you forget? Nothing. Go see the movie.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Nerd Out. We'll see you soon.